A nearly 3-hour delay. The ceasefire in the Gaza Strip has now begun. This is the first reprieve for over 2 million Gazans in over a year since the first ceasefire that lasted a week back in November of 2023. This time, the ceasefire calls for at least 6 weeks of calm and the hope that maybe it could be permanent. Large-scale relief efforts are underway, and we have images, as you can see here, of aid trucks finally starting to cross into Gaza from Egypt. And we now have the names of the 3 female hostages expected to be released today. Take a look here at your screen. You can see those 3 women. Joining us now is ABC News national security and defense analyst Mick Milroy. Thank you for being with us, Mick. You're a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Appreciate you being with us. First, let's talk about how significant this ceasefire is and your thoughts on how it all unfolded, how long it took.
So, Janae, it's very significant, and it took a lot of effort on the part of the U.S., Qatar, and Egypt to get this far, and of course, compromises on both sides from the Israelis and Hamas. And now we are where we are. But this is a very delicate situation because neither side trusts each other at all. So every step of this has to be choreographed. The release of the female hostages is going to coincide with the increase in humanitarian aid desperately needed for the people that live in Gaza, and also the release of Palestinian prisoners, which is a big sticking point for Israel, some of whom were serving life sentences for crimes. So this is a very tense situation, but the more that happens as scheduled, the more trust will be built and the more likely that we'll continue into this first phase of getting more hostages released.
Mick, it's so interesting to hear you use words like tense and delicate to describe this and then explain that it's because neither side really trusts each other. And that's why it's so important that we see things stick to the timetable as it's been laid out, specifically around humanitarian aid. As you just mentioned, you're involved in the humanitarian aid effort in Gaza. What can you tell us about those efforts, especially given how tense and delicate all of this is and how much need there is there in Gaza?
Well, there is a huge need for not only food, but also fuel. Fuel runs the hospitals. And if you don't have energy in the hospitals, power in the hospitals, you can't really have a hospital. So this is multiple parts. It's food, it's medical medicines, and it's fuel. And it's not just to get into Gaza, it's also to get throughout Gaza. 300 of the 600 per day are supposed to go into the northern part of Gaza, which is very difficult. It's difficult to transit inside Gaza. The roads are destroyed. And of course, there are criminal gangs that try to steal this. But it's incumbent on every group that is doing this to see that it happens, and it happens in a way that is consistent with the ceasefire agreement, because that is a critical component that needs to happen, just like the hostages all need to come out.
And so, as you were saying, according to that agreement, there are certain things that we are looking to happen at specific times. And we've seen some fluctuations in that already this morning when the ceasefire was set to begin. There was a couple hours delay. We were expecting the first phase of those 3 hostages to be released, I believe, about 30 minutes ago. What does it mean when we do see some deviation from that agreement, when we see a 30-minute difference? Does this just reflect how delicate it is, the lack of trust, or do these things just sometimes move this slowly? What's it mean, Mick?
That's a good question, Janae. So sometimes it could mean hesitation that is more political, if you will, part of the negotiation. Sometimes it's just practical. One of the issues has been how many of these hostages, we believe there's 90 still left, are alive. That is something that's normally done at the beginning. It's called proof of life of any kind of hostage negotiations. But it's been, according to Hamas, very difficult to determine this because they can't move throughout Gaza because there's an active conflict. So one of the problems is for Israel is to find out which hostages are still alive so they know what they're negotiating to do. And that might be something that now is improved as the ceasefire goes into effect and Hamas can move around to try to find these individuals and find their status. This is going to be a very sad thing if we see a lot of these hostages come out that are already deceased. It's going to cause a lot of tension, as you would imagine, not just with the families, of course, but the entire population of Israel. It's going to challenge it if there is a lot of deceased hostages that are coming out, especially in these this first wave and this first phase of 33 hostages. But This is a very delicate situation and something that we have to really see whether it can go forward.
And this is all part of the first of this three-phase agreement. Mick, you have a lot of friends we know in Israel. Talk about the concern in getting to the second phase, because, again, this is still the first phase that we're working through. But all of this, as we saw three of Prime Minister Netanyahu's cabinet members resign yesterday in protest.
And that's one of the problems. We have, of course, this political situation where Prime Minister Netanyahu has a coalition government. As you mentioned, several already resigned because they don't want to see a ceasefire agreement. Going into the second phase means a full withdrawal of the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, out of Gaza. So that will be a huge political decision, and one that won't be done easily, because it's very difficult, of course, to insert the IDF back into Gaza if this ceasefire then breaks later. So it's a very significant decision. There'll be a lot of discussion of what would fill the vacuum, the security vacuum. Would it be a multinational force? If not, what would it be? What would be acceptable to both the Israelis and the people in Gaza? So it's a very delicate situation now, but it's only going to be more difficult politically as we get closer to and potentially into the second phase of this ceasefire agreement.
And we are seeing how full of tension and how delicate it is, and really appreciate you, Mick, for being here to break it down and explain to us all of the context surrounding it. So thank you, Mick Mulroy.